Hello, political scientists. We've made it to the last part of Unit 2, which is the third branch we've still have to discuss. That's the judicial branch. So we've already covered the legislative branch and the executive branch. And now, as we cover this third one, a few things to keep in mind. Is there a branch that is the most important? And if there is a branch that's more important than the others, is that dangerous? So think about that in terms of the argument by both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? Is it good to have a branch that is maybe a bit more important or more powerful? Now, what did the framers think? Was it completely balanced where they shared power completely equally and they were completely as important as the other two, or not? So let's think of some of the anti-federalists first. Now, we know Brutus was an anti-federalist, and we already mentioned several reasons why Brutus opposed the Constitution. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation, there wasn't just not an executive, there also wasn't this judicial branch. So anything new, like the presidency, like the judiciary, is going to be a big concern to Brutus. Brutus's concerns about the judicial branch were several. He did not like the fact that judges had lifetime tenure. He thought that that could uh, make the judges lack accountability, right? Because they were sort of safe. He thought that the power to decide the constitutionality of a law meant that the judicial branch would actually overpower Congress. And remember, that was the only branch of the article, so that's Brutus's favorite branch, right? So if you can basically undo everything that Congress does, that was a concern to Brutus as well. It places, Congress and state courts at the mercy of the judiciary. But who refutes Brutus? Well, it's always the Federalist Papers. And Federalist 78 is written by Hamilton. And he brings up a few points to say, like, listen, guys, you don't need to worry about the judicial branch. If we think of it in terms of the Constitution, Article 1, 2, and 3, the judicial branch is Article 3. And it is the smallest, like, is the least amount of words on the Constitution. So that just reflects that it has less powers and it's not something to be as concerned about. Hamilton thought that it was important to have this steady, not upright, and impartial administration of the laws. And to have this impartial administration means that you need the courts. He thought that the independent judiciary will not be a threat. And a big reason is, think of the executive. The executive has the power of the sword, right? If the Supreme Court or the federal courts decide something, they don't have the authority to send in an army to defend it. The judiciary doesn't have the powers like a commander-in-chief has. Congress has the power of the purse, everything to do with money and a budget. The judiciary doesn't demand funding to things. It doesn't demand funding to be taken from things. It doesn't have that power either. The only power the judicial branch has is the power of the pen, right, to make the laws. But it depends on others to enforce them. It depends on others to even write these laws. So Hamilton wanted to allay the fears of Brutus and the other ones. Neither force or will, but merely judgment, is what Hamilton said. No, not force, not will, only judgment. So the Constitution is the national law. So a national court, right, it is needed to interpret its meaning, right? These are the ideas of Hamilton. But if this is the case, who would stop the other branches from unconstitutional ways, right? The Congress could just make any laws. The president could take lots of action. You need someone there to check theirs and go back to the Constitution and make sure everything matches up. Now, as we said, remember Article 3 is brief and it's even pretty vague. So, how did powers of the judicial branch grow over time? Just like powers of Congress have grown, just like powers of the presidency have grown, the judicial branch's powers have grown as well. So, the fact that Hamilton said the courts are not a threat, well, they might not still be a threat completely, but definitely more so than Hamilton probably thought back in the 1780s. Well, we have a brief and vague Article 3, and then by 1789, you get the Judiciary Act, which mentions allowing writs of mandamus. When we talk more about Marbury versus Madison, we'll explain what that means. But then Marbury versus Madison, this is what introduces judicial review. So if you don't know anything about Marbury versus Madison, if you're in my class, you should go look it up real quick. But we're going to come back to this again in the future. But it's important to remember that what judicial review established was that the court had the ability to actually declare laws by Congress unconstitutional. So when this issue was before court, everyone thought the court was either going to take sort of the side of Marbury or versus Madison. And they didn't either. They said, we aren't even authorized to make a decision on this case because the law, this whole writ of mandamus, like, it's not even constitutional. It's unconstitutional, so we don't have the power to act. So this power of judicial review is a very significant power of the courts. This is a brief overview for 2.8. We're going to get into 2.9, which is the legitimacy of the branch. So now that the courts have this power, what makes it legitimate? So stay tuned.